Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Fantasy Slant, brought to you by ProFootballFocus.com and powered by DraftKings. I am not your usual host, Michael Moore, this week. The usual host, Scott Spratt, is out this week, but in his place, I have the very capable Joey Cartolano. How are you, man?
I'm good. How about you, Mike?
I'm good. We've got the game on in the background, so if you hear Joey scream out or just like look on in horror at some hit, then all the viewers and listeners know. So, but Joey, it was a pretty busy week 6, I would say. And I think it's a little more than a third of the way through the season. There's starting to be some trends, I think, that aren't just flukes, obviously. Let's cover your Patriots first. How about that? Just a little background. Tom Brady obviously was going through a little bit of a funk there the first month or so. Only averaging 201 yards a game. And then, of course, was famously or infamously benched for Jimmy Garoppolo in the Kansas City blowout, which, if you want to chalk that up to just pissing Brady off and turning a corner, then you can, because he then proceeded to throw for 315 on average the next 2 games. So I guess my first question, Joey, is which Tom Brady should we believe?
I think it's somewhere in between. He's definitely not as bad as he was in Kansas City, and I don't know if he is going to be statistically as good as he has been the last 2 games. I was a little disappointed in Buffalo's defense, but it was vintage Brady. He completed passes to over 10 different receivers. He spread the ball around. He finally has a semblance of a deep threat, I hope, in Brian Tims. He only played like 15 snaps or something like that, but he had that one catch for 43 yards, and he brings an element to the offense that no one else really does. I think the thing that has really changed it is Gronkowski's getting closer to 100%, and he is arguably the best playmaker in the league when he's 100%, because he just presents so many mismatch problems, and he can block like a tackle. So
Yeah, and I think for me anyway, that's the biggest point is, each week it seems like Gronkowski's snap count gets a little bit higher. And look, even on a fraction of snap counts, he's still producing like a tight end 1, which is just ridiculous. So, yeah, no, I completely agree. So, I guess the next sort of question, and we covered Brady. I think we both agree Brady's going to be Brady. But, with the news today, unfortunately, of Stephen Ridley being done for the season with the not just torn ACL but MCL, what do they do now, Joey? I mean, they didn't really have much of a running game until the last couple of weeks, and it really looked like Stephen Ridley might catch on, but then this happens. Who are you taking? Like, who's going to be the guy now, at least to get the starts at running back? Now, not necessarily a guy you can count on for fantasy production, but who are you looking to be the hot ticket there in New England?
if I had to choose one, I'm looking at James White. I think we know what Shane Vereen's role is. He's a third down back. They'll mix him in on early downs. They'll split him out wide some. He's a low-end RB2 flex for PPR purposes, but I don't see him being an in-between-the-tackles early down runner. Brandon Bolden got most of the carries when Ridley got hurt, but I think the only reason he was on the active roster over White is that he is a core special teamer. With Ridley out, I think you're going to see White be active on more game days, and I'd definitely be taking a flyer on him. He's easily the lowest cost of the 3, probably. Well, I guess Bolden, too. They're probably both on the scrap heap, but...
Right, right. I think we should caution folks. We're not necessarily saying there's a game changer somewhere in there that's going to get a shot.
Yeah.
But look, as we all know, running backs are a very
Fickle.
yeah. There's just not a lot, and there's very low supply and very high demand. So, yeah. Another question, Joey. As people, if they don't know, you are our resident Patriot expert. Yep. What about Shane Vereen? I mean, it's heading into the season. I don't think there was any doubt, especially in PPR leagues. He was a definite running back too, but it just it just hasn't been consistent. Am I crazy? I mean, is that accurate?
No, his usage has been frustrating. I still wouldn't be afraid to roll him out as a low-end RB2 in a full PPR league. Half PPR might make me worry a little, but full PPR with Ridley out, he's going to be catching 4 or 5 balls every game. So
Yeah, no, I guess another thing to consider with that is he had such a good year last year. I mean, would you think it was due to Gronkowski being out most of the time, or what do you chalk that up to?
I think it had something to do with that. I think, well, Ridley struggled a lot last year too, so that led to more opportunities for him. So I think with Ridley out, you're going to see a slight bump in Vereen's usage, but I wouldn't be banking on him as a RB1 in anything.
Right, right, right. Yeah, he flirted with that I think before the season, but now I think as Bill Belichick has proven time and again, unless your name's Rob Gronkowski, there's just nothing reliable in a in a Patriot offense. So.
Right. And we should mention that Tim Wright too. He's not playing as many snaps either, but that two tight end offense, we know that Brady excels in it. So we'll
right.
see what they do with that. Wright had
yeah.
a touchdown, so that's 2 straight weeks with the touchdown.
Yeah, and the more they, like you said, the more they roll that out, the better chances Tom Brady gets that going. So, looking forward, Joey, their next 4 games, they've got the Jets, the Bears, the Broncos, and the Colts. So I think it's fair to say there could be some shootouts somewhere in there. Is that right?
I'd say so, yes.
So for Brady, just going back to him real quick, I guess where do you put him the rest of the year? Is it low-end quarterback 1 or, firmly quarterback 2? I mean, where does he shake out at the end of the year?
I think if you're in a 12 or 14 team league and the rest of your starting lineup is stacked, he's a fine QB1. He's a low-end QB1. Like I'd put him like in the 12 to 15 range for the rest of the year.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of upside there at that spot.
Oh yeah, that should say that has the upside, week to week upside of a 354 touchdown game like this.
Right. And look, against any of those teams, quite frankly. So yeah, I think we agree on all fronts there. Let's go next to, I don't know. They're probably the most surprising team for me anyway. I definitely didn't see this coming, but the Dallas Cowboys, sitting at 5-1, beat the Seattle Seahawks yesterday on the road, no less. 30-23, and I think we could probably agree, Joey. It was a lot. Well, it wasn't as close as the score would indicate. Would that be right?
No, they were in control the whole game, and it all goes back to their offensive line. They've hit on a few good picks in the last few years. Tyron Smith is an absolute beast. Zach Martin this year was their first-round pick, and DeMarco Murray is a very good running back. Don't get me wrong, but that offensive line is shouldering the load for that team, and it's making Tony Romo a more efficient quarterback.
Right. Yeah, I think it all starts with that line. You're absolutely right. And actually, a fun fact that I did not know, at least heading into this week, Zach Martin was one of 2 rookies drafted in the first round this year to start 100% of the snaps, which, I mean, for a Jerry Jones, led team, I think is stunning, quite frankly. But you know what? Hey, I don't think anyone can argue with his drafting the last couple of years.
Nope.
So, I think the biggest recipient, I think we can all agree, of that line is DeMarco Murray. He's just having, honestly, a historic season, at least up to this point. He's averaging 130 yards a game on an average of 27 carries. I guess the first question, and it's probably not much of a question, but that's not sustainable, right?
No, it's definitely not sustainable, especially given Murray's injury history. I'm not one to predict injuries, but I mean, you got to think he misses time at some point with the usage. I know at one point a couple weeks ago he's on pace for 400 carries. If you're an owner of Murray, you have to have Joseph Randle rostered.
Right, right. Yeah, there's just no way you can. I just don't see any way you can go the whole season with him healthy. Believe me, I wish you would, because I mean he's just having a nuts season. But yeah, I guess it's not that they're mutually exclusive, Joey. But you've got Des Bryant sitting there. He's averaging 6 catches for 73 yards. Obviously, he's better than the stats allow. I guess the question is, when do you see him sort of picking it up again, or does he pick it up again, or have they firmly gone to the run in this case?
I haven't looked at their upcoming schedule to predict an exact breakout game. But
Actually, I have that. It's they're home to the Giants, home to the Redskins, home to the Cardinals, and then at Jacksonville.
the Giants have a good secondary, but as we saw last night with Philadelphia, they can be had. And I think it's a great time to buy Dez. I mean, you look at what Terrence Williams is doing. How fluky is it that what Terrence Williams is doing? Like he scored another touchdown this week. I'm not buying that at all. If you have Terrence Williams, you should be selling. Like his touchdown rate is so fluky right now. I'd be buying Dez across the board.
Yeah, I don't think there's any doubt that Dez will bust out sooner or later. And that sort of ties back to Tony Romo. I mean, you had mentioned he's becoming a lot more efficient, but for fantasy purposes, he's at 250 yards a game. He's got 11 touchdowns, 5 interceptions. I don't know. That seems pretty sustainable to me, right?
Yeah, I mean that's pretty much his floor considering how much they're running the ball.
Right. Yeah, that's the thing you got to remember is as much as they're calling DeMarco Murray's number, Romo's still getting his. He's still averaging 250 a game. So,
Yeah.
but obviously, just like Murray, and I think it's not it's not weird to say this, but there's just as good a chance Romo gets hurt at some point too. I think we all probably held our breath, or at least Romo owners did yesterday when he got laid out by Bobby Wagner in the first quarter there. But with Romo and Murray, you can't. I mean, you can expect a high probability of being injured, but you just got to ride those guys till it happens.
Yep.
And I guess overall, do you see them winning the division at the end of the year, Joey, or is Philadelphia going to stick it out, or what do you see from them going forward?
Philly would be my gut pick, just because I like them a lot. I think Chip Kelly's a great coach, and I think the Dallas D has to get exposed at some point. I think they're playing all over their heads right now, but I still think the Cowboys will make the playoffs pretty easily.
Yeah, and you know what? If their defense keeps playing like this, they're going to be pretty dangerous. So
Yeah.
So we covered a couple of roller coasters. So let's get to another team that is firmly in the middle. That would be the Chicago Bears up to this point. 3-3 through 6 weeks. Their point differential is just about even. I believe it's -1. And 14th in the league in offense. Certainly, I don't think what we expected going into the season. I mean, Alshon Jeffrey and Brandon Marshall were consensus wide receiver ones. But so far, Jeffrey's averaging 5 catches with 82 yards, and Marshall's averaging even worse at 4 catches and 50 yards. Their upcoming schedule is, I think it could be had. You've got the Dolphins, Patriots, Packers, and Vikings. And it could go either way, Joey, with the Bears. What do you see happening to them and their offense in general?
I think it's got nowhere to go but up. I love Mark Trestman as a coach. Alshon and Marshall, especially Marshall, have both been banged up for multiple weeks this year. Alshon came back earlier than Marshall did. I think they both got hurt in week 3. Alshon was a little healthier for that Carolina game. But I think, I'm not sure when their bye is. If they have an upcoming bye, that'd do them wonders. Just get Alshon and Marshall healthy. Forte's still doing his thing. Martellus Bennett, he slowed down a little but he started hot. I still like him a lot in Trestman's offense. And Cutler, I'd have to look. I would think Cutler's producing like at least a back-end QB1. Despite their overall team statistical middling, I feel like for each guy they're doing their part, or they will do their part, I should say.
Yeah, I'm with you. I don't think there's anywhere to go but up. And look, you have all the pieces there. It's not like they're working with a different scheme or anything. So, yeah, I think it's just a matter of time probably before they bust out. So I would agree with that. So those were a couple of the teams that we wanted to cover. Some of the fantasy guys that were pretty relevant. But Joe, you and I are Dynasty. Well, I won't say experts, at least not for me, but we specialize in Dynasty leagues. So let's cover a couple of the rookies and how they're doing so far. I took one from each position that will sort of go in depth in, and then we'll get to your rankings a little later. But first, let's talk about I think, well, Teddy Bridgewater at the quarterback position, it's pretty much between him and Blake Bortles and even Derek Carr at this point. But I think Bridgewater has probably had the most up and down start to his to his young career. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, definitely. The injury didn't help him last week. I'm not putting too much stock into this performance as bad as it was. Maybe it's because I had somewhat low expectations for Bridgewater from the outset. I didn't think he was going to thrive this year. Norv Turner runs like a downfield system, and I just didn't think Bridgewater is a great fit for it. I like him long term, but I just don't see him as a great fit for Norv Turner's offense. Detroit's got an awesome D. Detroit might be the best D in the league. Statistically, I know that they were top 2 going into last week. I haven't checked this week. But, yeah, I've only ever viewed Bridgewater as a QB2 with low-end QB1 upside, so maybe it's just that my expectations were a little lower. So.
Yeah, no, I think that's probably going to be pretty accurate. I mean, yeah, his first start against the Falcons, 317 passing yards, 27 yards rushing, and a rushing touchdown. But again, it was against the Falcons, which, you know, this year anyway is not saying a whole lot. And then, yeah, Detroit just tore him up, and they got to him. I think he got sacked 8 times and got hurried 12 times. If you had an IDP player on Detroit this week, you did pretty well. Yeah, 188 yards passing, 3 interceptions. It just overall wasn't a good day, but like you said, that defense is quite good this year. So you can't put it all on Bridgewater, but at the same time, you know, like you said, I don't know that Bridgewater by himself is able to sort of rise above that and, you know, beat those good defenses every now and then like those great quarterbacks do.
He doesn't really have much around him. That I know a lot of guys I follow on Twitter that are like evaluate O-line play said that Matt Khalil is really struggling this year. And I mean, Patterson? I guess he's banged up, but I mean, you know my feelings on Patterson.
We have covered them at length, and they are not good. So
yeah, they're not good. And Greg Jennings looks like a shell of his former self. So.
Well, that's what happens when you're in your 30s and you're playing receiver. But no, I agree. And look, let's face it, the Adrian Peterson suspension didn't help anyone. And you're right, that offensive line has just not looked good. I believe, and I'd have to fact check this, but I believe our very own PFF grades have Matt Khalil as literally the worst player on offense.
I heard something like that, but I didn't have the exact statistic in front of me. I think I can semi-concur with that.
Yeah, and if you watch the game, you just saw Ziggy Ansah dominate him yesterday. So, yeah, it's probably not going to be a good season for Teddy Bridgewater. You know, if you have him in Dynasty, it's certainly no reason to panic yet, and it's certainly too early to jump ship. But yeah, until they, I think, make marked improvement on that offense, I don't think you can expect a whole lot. I'm with you there. Going to a running back to cover, I had Isaiah Crowell with Cleveland, who, you know, it's kind of funny. The first couple weeks, and this always seems to happen, you always have those players that have that high yards per carry, and, you know, without many carries, and those people seem to get all the attention. Well, here we are in week 6, Joey, and Crowell is still averaging 5.5 yards a carry through 44 carries. He's had 3 games of 11 carries or more, and in those games averaged 4.9, 5.0, and 7.0 yards per carry. And now, given Ben Tate is back now, which is good for the Cleveland offense as a whole, but what does that do to Crowell's value this year and in dynasty leagues going forward?
I don't think you can look at Ben Tate as a deterrent as far as investing in Crowell in dynasty leagues. He's the clear guy to own, and I'm kind of pissed that I passed on him in my home league. I took Austin Seferian-Jenkins at 21, and I was thinking about Crowell, and he went about 3 or 4 picks later. I'm really regretting it now. He looks real. I mean, there's a reason Terrence West was a healthy scratch yesterday, and it's because of Crowell. He, like you said, he's averaging 5.5 yards per carry on the season. He had 11 for 77 yesterday. That's 7 yards a carry. He played 28% of the snaps, which isn't that much, but if Ben Tate were to go down, I'd expect that to jump up to 75, something like that. Their offensive line is playing great right now, and we all know Ben Tate's injury history already this year.
Right. Yeah, I agree. I think it's getting to the point where they can't deny Crowell anymore. They really
No,
can't. And
playing
as
too
much,
well.
yeah, and I like to think the Cleveland coaches are smart enough to not hold him back anymore. But
Yeah.
yeah, and I'm with you. Once Ben Tate goes down again, because he will, I think Crowell's probably going to be the guy. So.
Yeah. I mean,
Um,
if you got him a couple in your waiver wire a couple weeks ago, you got fantasy playoff gold mine. Like by week 13, 14, 15, I think he's going to be getting 15 or 20 carries a game, and I think he may win some fantasy championships.
Yeah, that's very possible. He'll break off a couple 80-yard runs, and everyone will be happy.
And
So,
it's sad because I do like Terrence West.
yeah, it's kind of funny. Cleveland has sort of an abundance of riches there at the running back position, when not when a lot of teams would kill to have that. But from the dynasty perspective, yeah, Tate only signed a 2-year deal. Believe me, he is not the long-term
Yeah.
solution there.
And I'm
And
sure there's not much guaranteed money beyond this year.
yeah, and look, even if the Browns decide to have sort of that 1-2 punch of West and Crowell, look, if Crowell's averaging 5.5 yards a carry on 10 to 15 carries a game, well, look, there you go. You're at 50 yards and a touchdown every week. So,
Yep.
all right, moving on to receiver. One that obviously was very popular heading into the season, in Sammy Watkins, but I think it's fair to say there have been some other receivers that have outproduced him, at least so far. Only averaging 4 catches, 50 yards a game to this point, but and me and Scott Spratt sort of covered this last week. There is hope on the horizon with Kyle Orton starting, which is not
That's a
something.
funny statement, man.
I know. I was gonna. That's not something you should say very often or be proud of, but it is. I mean, there is hope. But what's your expectations, Joey, the rest of the season with Watkins? And look, I think it's fair to start talking about what Buffalo needs to do at quarterback for his dynasty value next year.
Yeah. I think you can do worse as your wide receiver 3 in a PPR league because he's going to get targets, and he has that upside to just blow up in any given week. Orton's getting him the ball much better than Manuel ever was. I think the fact that they went to Orton this quick, signed him off the street, I think they're done with Manuel. They know that experiment's over. Unfortunately, they gave their first-round pick to Cleveland for Watkins next year, so I don't know if they're going to be highly drafting a quarterback anytime soon. But this hasn't changed much about my dynasty value in Watkins. He's still my number 1 player in this class. He played 98% of the snaps. He's going to get volume to buoy him in the short term, and then they'll fix that quarterback situation in the long term. They have to.
Yeah, I gotta believe so. And it sort of it is in line with what my expectations were for Watkins. Which, look, you couldn't go wrong with him. Either Manuel was going to show he progressed to this year, and Watkins was going to see a lot of that action, or Manuel was going to suck pretty early, like he did this year, and they were going to move on. And look, the hope is that they can get a better quarterback next year, but I think we can all rejoice in the fact that it won't be E.J. Manuel. So,
Yeah.
now I guess does he still? And given Week 6 is super early for Dynasty assessment, but is he still your top rookie receiver at this point?
Oh, yeah, for dynasty purposes, definitely. Evans is a close second. He's actually coming on, too. I had some notes on him here. He had 4 for 55 and a touch this weekend. Other than a week 1 where he had 8 targets and a 6.0 average depth per target, he's averaged 14 yards a catch and 16.1 average depth per target. For reference, Watkins has averaged about 12. That yards per catch and A-dot, that puts him right up with the top-tier wide receivers in the league, so that's nice to see from him. He's on pace for 7 TDs, which is good. So Evans is a close second for me, but I still prefer Watkins with Cooks and Matthews. And I get reluctantly, I'll say Benjamin close behind them.
No, don't be reluctant. Embrace it, Joey. Accept
I
it
was
and embrace
down on Benjamin. I was wrong. I was wrong.
You weren't alone.
Right
You
now,
weren't
he's
alone.
only catching like 55% of his targets. I will say that he is volume dependent, but that volume's not going to change. So
Right. As long as Jericho Cotchery and Jason Avant are your fellow starters, you're probably going to see a lot of action there.
yeah,
So okay, moving on to a rookie tight end that you could call it a mini breakout game, I guess. Jason Morrow, who we quite honestly have not heard a whole lot of this season, played the most snaps he did so far, with 55% yesterday. Had 12 targets, caught 10 of those, which is a good sign, for 68 yards and a touchdown. Is this the beginning of a productive tight end, Joey, or is it a fluky thing against, a New York Jets team that had to chuck it towards the end there?
I think it's somewhere in between. I don't think it's a total fluke, but it doesn't change much of Amaro's assessment for me. I've always had him as a low upside, touchdown dependent tight end too. I don't see that changing much in the next year or two unless somehow New York gets a quality starting quarterback. Like you said, 10 to 12 targets, that's good. But he only averaged 6.8 yards per catch. He only had 68 yards on the 10 receptions. He's only averaging 8.8 on the year. That's pretty pathetic. Even for a
which is funny because of the three top rookie tight ends, him, Ebron, and Safarian Jenkins, he would have been the last one you would have thought would be that low as far as yards per catch, right?
Yeah. I think the Texas Tech offense created a lot of space for him to operate. I think in the pros, I just don't know if he has the athleticism to get the yards after the catch like a Safarian Jenkins or an Ebron.
Yeah, and he's on a great situation. I mean, personally, I thought it was the best situation for a tight end amongst the top ones. I mean, there's just no other targets there behind Eric Decker. So, but I think, you take it with a grain of salt, his production. And look, right now it's tied to either Geno Smith or Mike Vick, which it's not an ideal situation for fantasy production goes. So, but Joey, that covered some of the highlights, but you have some dynasty rankings as far as rookies go. Why don't we cover those? I mean, we've got, I think, enough game data to make some determinations on this.
Yeah, so we covered a good amount of it. I still got Watkins and Evans in a tier of their own at the top, followed by Hyde, Cooks, Matthews, Benjamin. And then I got some guys who are still proving themselves, and they kind of did this week. I'm not going to say they proved themselves, but they're on their way. Bishop Sankey's finally getting some work. He didn't have a great yards per carry average this week, but prior to it, I'd like to see them get him more involved in the pass game. Dexter McCluster's kind of stealing some of his thunder there, but he's great when he's out in space. 8 and 18 carries is always good, so hopefully Wisdom Hunt doesn't kick us in the collective fantasy nuts moving forward like he has for the first 5 weeks. Allen Robinson, he is getting a ton of targets. He hasn't made many plays downfield yet, but I feel like that's coming. His ADOT so far is only 10.4. He's averaging 10 yards a carry, and he's catching most of his targets. He caught 8 of 9 targets for 68 yards this week. I was listening to the Ross Tucker, Evan Silva Fantasy Feast podcast last week, and Ross Tucker said he speaks to Gus Bradley regularly, and it's clear that he and Blake Bortles consider Robinson their favorite rookie receiver out of Hearns and Lee. It's pretty clear Lee's fallen out of favor at this point. And Hearns, he's talented, he's physically talented, but he has some brutal drops.
And has already been relegated to 4th on that depth chart. So I think it's probably fair to say people can move on from Hearns, at least for me anyway.
Yeah. Some other guys just moving down the list. Cody Latimer, I think, is a great buy right now. I don't even know if he's been active for a game, but he's ultra talented, and he's going to get in at some point, whether it be later this year or next year. I think he's a great buy for the rest of the season. Devontae Adams, he's coming on a little. He's definitely surpassed Jarrett Boykin. Randall Cobbs and Aaron Rodgers is always going to be able to produce at least 2 fantasy-relevant wide receivers, if not 3. Odell Beckham, if you asked me before the draft, Beckham would have been my third receiver behind to see him doing his thing last week anyway. The whole Giants offense, I'm kind of just considering this week a wash as far as Giants skill position players. That was just brutal all around. Moving down, I have Crowell. I'm looking at my rankings from a week ago. I had Crowell there. I'd probably bump Crowell up at this point, followed by McKinnon, McKinnon too, very similar to Coel. He actually surpassed Ejada in the snaps as he should this week pretty significantly. I think McKinnon is another guy who probably was on wires a couple weeks ago. Maybe in dynasty leagues, even someone gave up on him early and cut him, and he's gonna win championship. Uh,
Yeah, well, and honestly, I even think for dynasty purposes, I feel pretty confident he's going to be the starter there next year.
oh yeah,
I just don't see a scenario where Adrian Peterson goes back to Minnesota next year. And look, like we sort of touched on earlier, Minnesota has a lot of holes. It's not like running back is going to be a huge, a glaring spot next year. So I think it's possible McKinnon is going to be, a running back too heading into next year at the very least.
yeah. If the owner in your league isn't treating him like he's going to be the starting running back in Minnesota next year, I'd pounce on it because he
Yeah,
is.
yeah. All right, keep going, Joey. What do you got?
Then I got Safarian Jenkins, who I love. He had 4 for 58, I believe, this week. He's playing a ton of snaps. I think him and Mike Evans are going to be a great tandem moving forward for years to come. Jeremy Hill, right after him, I think he's going to be a thorn in Giovanni Bernard's side for a long time. But the thing is, I think with Hugh Jackson, there's going to be enough to go around. I just think as far as touchdowns, goal line scores, he's going to be a vulture. So I like him. He has value, but I wouldn't want to be banking on him as anything more than a low-end RB2 in fantasy, just unless Bernard goes down, because Bernard is the starter there pretty clearly. Then I got my boy Terrence West, who I had bumped down. I still like him long-term. His best success might come somewhere else than Cleveland, but I still think he's a solid dynasty stash. Bortles is my first-ranked quarterback. He had a great preseason. I know he's looked a little shaky so far, but I really like him long-term. Once they get a line who can protect him, they should be picking high in the next couple of drafts, and they have the receivers already in place. So.
And I was going to say, I mean, he's actually done, I think, well in spite of that line so far. I mean, he had over 300 yards yesterday. And given it's not an ideal situation because he is throwing under pressure a ton, but yeah, like you said, he's one or two good offensive linemen away from having the time he needs to make those throws. And like you said, he's got the receivers there. I mean, the pieces are in place, and at least so far, I think he's proven to be, at the very least, the most consistent rookie quarterback so far. So yeah, I'm with you there. Now, it remains to be seen if he can be in that middle quarterback one discussion. But look, I think once he grows a couple more years, I think low end quarterback one's going to be his floor. Is that about right?
Because he can move. He's gonna give you like 20 or 30 yards on the ground every game with a potential for more.
Yeah. So okay, on quarterbacks, we've talked about Bridgewater, talked about Bortles. Can't really talk about Manziel. You got to give him an incomplete at this point. What is your assessment of Derek Carr at this point? I mean, he's truly the only rookie that has started every game this year. Yeah, I think it was every game. Yeah, he took over before the season started. So, and has looked okay, but I guess the question is, how long will that last, and will it be in Oakland?
I like Derek Carr. I think given what he's doing, what did he have, 4 touchdowns last week or on Sunday? Against a good Chargers defense. It's weird to say that the Chargers have a good defense, but they really do this year. And he has nothing around him. I mean, he has the ghosts of Darren McFadden and Maurice Jones-Drew running behind him. He has a brutal offensive line, and his best wide receiver is Andre Holmes, who I actually like, but I mean, not as a number 1 wide receiver. They're going to be picking high. Hopefully, they get a skill position player to surround him with, but. Yeah, I mean, he's a wait and see right now. He's shown everything you can ask from him, given the situation he's in.
Yeah, I don't know that. Yeah, I mean, of all the rookie quarterbacks, I think he's proven he's at least got the, I don't know, the most, not moxie, but I guess confidence or whatever you want to call it, because believe me, he's entered a very, very, very tough situation there in Oakland that could rattle a lot of people. I mean, it rattled Matt McGloin after like 3 games.
Yeah.
So
he actually hasn't been sacked that much, though. I will say that. I saw a funny stat. In his first 167 attempts, He's been sacked 3 times or 4 times, and his brother in Houston, in his first 167 attempts, got sacked like 35 times. So
Right.
he's doing
David
pretty well as far as his family's concerned.
David Carr only wishes he could have been drafted by Oakland 10 years after that. But
Yeah.
yeah, and I think as far as the quarterbacks go, I mean, I think this is going to be about it for this bunch. I mean, you had Logan Thomas, fill in for the injured Drew Stanton, who was filling in for the injured Carson Palmer 2 weeks ago. But besides that, do you really see any other quarterbacks worth stashing in dynasty leagues?
I mean, you got to hold on to Manziel.
Well,
Just
yeah, I'm sorry. Okay, not including Manziel. I mean, of the four that we've sort of touched on here, I don't know that there just is anyone's out there. Is there?
I mean, if you're in a, you'll laugh, but if you're in a deep, deep league, I'd hold on to Garoppolo.
Oh yeah. Okay. No, I take that back. I don't know how you live, Joey, with Bill Belichick as your coach. It just has to be like
It's
maddening.
such a double-edged sword. It's double-edged.
Right. Man, live by the Belichick and die by the Belichick.
Yeah.
Man. All right. All right. What other sort of dynasty? I guess one last question, Joey, is there any other big, movers on your dynasty rankings through 6 weeks, either in the right direction or in the wrong direction?
Crowell and McKinnon have definitely bumped themselves up the most, and Benjamin. I was relatively low on Benjamin. I had him like around the fifth or sixth receiver in this class, but you can't help but put him up with Cooks at this point. Let's see. Kadeem Carey's looked good. I bumped him up a little. People forget Matt Forte. He's 29, and Carey was amazingly productive at Arizona. He can catch passes. So if anything ever happened to Forte, I think Carey would be a good option in Trestman's system. Let's see. I'm going to have to bump James White up. Ridley's agents, especially Ridley with the injury. Who knows what's going to happen with him? So I think there's a buy low window on White right now before we see what happens when the dust settles there. Andre Williams, I don't know what price he is in people's leagues, but I think he's a good buy right now, especially coming off a down game like Forte with Carey. Jennings is 29, and he's much less proven than Forte, as good as he's looked this year. Yeah, that's pretty much it.
Yeah, and look, it's only 6 weeks, and it certainly doesn't mean there's, I think, any rookie you should absolutely jump ship on, but there's definitely so far, and a lot of stuff you could probably take advantage of, I think, is the lesson here. So
yeah.
All right, Joey. Any parting thoughts for the viewers and listeners at home today?
I forgot one guy, Jarvis Landry. He had a real good game this week.
Yeah, and that was a guy, especially in this very, very large class of rookie receivers, that nobody talked about heading into the season.
No, Beckham kind of overshadowed him at LSU, but he had very similar numbers at LSU, and there are targets to be had outside of Wallace. So
I think so. And look, he had a bad combine. That's what sort of got this ball rolling. He got drafted by Miami, which, at first probably didn't seem ideal for a receiver, but like you said, when you think about it, there's not anyone else there to be catching the ball behind Mike Wallace, really. And I think Ryan Tannehill has proven to be, a competent enough quarterback to get the ball around. And look, especially this year with Landry, I think he could be one of the more productive rookie receivers and come out of nowhere. So
yep, definitely.
All right. Well, that was another edition of the Fantasy Slant, brought to you by ProFootballFocus.com, powered by DraftKings. For Joey Cartolano, I am Michael Moore, and we will see you next week.